Hello literature connoisseurs. Let's begin chapter 16 of Left Behind. The chapter begins with Steve telling Buck to hurry because he doesn't know how long he can pretend to impersonate Buck's alter ego. If he talks to the police and they learn that he is faking his identity, Steve will, or rather, should be arrested. Besides falsifying information to the police, they could also add obstruction to the list of charges. Buck should be next unless Steve sacrifices himself and takes full blame. Buck arrives at the meeting place where the interview is supposed to take place. He watches as Steve is being dragged from the hotel by the police as he's arrested. As they take him away, Steve insists his identity is the fake one Buck uses. Another reporter identifies Steve to the police officers that his identity is Steve Plank. Steve then insists that he is Steve Plank, but the officers ignore him. They continue to use Buck's alias as they address him. The authors are trying to make the police look stupid here because in real life it would not happen this way. Properly identifying him would be their number one priority in order to see if there are any warrants out on him. Buck enters and meets with a rival reporter named Eric Miller. He spots Buck and demands to know why he is here and what he is up to. Buck refuses to tell him, so Eric decides to hound him and follow him, trying to learn if he has an interview with Nicolae. Apparently Nicolae has decided he has done enough interviews for the day and is having all reporters, except Buck, turned away. Buck grabs Eric and gets physical with him and at one point chokes him, but Eric won't go away. Nicolae walks by and ends things as he spots Buck and calls him into his private room. Nicolae calls Buck by 3 different names he's used and a security guard points out that Buck has been lying about his name. This gets brushed off as comedy relief. Scene changes to Rayford and he's upset he ruined his chance to talk to Hattie. Not that he cares about her, but he planned to use her as a cover to try and convert Chloe without her getting offended at him. He calls Bruce and Bruce tells him that he's trying too hard, ignoring the shitty way he treats Hattie. Bruce remarks that he expected it to be easier to witness to others after the rapture. He is surprised that people are more resistant to his unfounded claims. It's almost like people are not interested in being emotionally manipulated by stories snake oil salesmen tell. No real evidence that a God exists is presented and bad hermeneutics is given by twisting Bible verses. The same Bible that Bruce's own testimony refutes when it proves that the promises within are not worth the flimsy paper it's written on. Rayford remarks that it's hard not to try so hard when it's his own daughter that is involved. Bruce pretends to show sympathy by remarking that he understands. Rayford makes a snarky comment as he seems to see through Bruce. Scene changes to Buck as he and Haim enter the private den of Nicolae's room. Nicolae asks for permission to call Buck by the nickname he uses. Buck is shocked that Nicolae knows that he uses the name Buck as a nickname. He asks how Nicolae knows about that and he changes the subject to deflect. Nicolae then talks about the warm reception he has received and how he has been asked to stay longer than was previously planned. It's sad they strawman the Antichrist to act so lame when they could have done better. They could make him into a real horrific character like the Joker from Batman if they put some effort into it. He could start out as being likable and friendly, someone to look up to, then turn him into the bad guy. Another example is the character of Ned Stark from Game of Thrones. He starts out as a character that everyone likes and when he gets murdered it becomes a complete surprise. The Left Behind authors could have done something similar with Nicolae into making him a hero type that the readers enjoy and when he turns evil it becomes a complete surprise. Instead they made him boring, a walking encyclopedia, that is more uninteresting than evil or scary. Just another failure in their long list. An aide enters and interrupts the conversation to tell Nicolae that the President of the United States is calling him. Nicolae puts the call on speaker after forcing Buck and Haim to listen to it. What an odd thing to do because these calls are considered private and confidential. Not usually open to the media to print them. However, if we are honest then we know Buck is not a real reporter. The President, we learn, has a German name yet from the way he talks like a Texan trying to be a cowboy. Insert eye roll here. This seems to happen so much you might want to protect your eyes to prevent them from rolling out of your head. LOL. Fritz, the president, invites Nicolae to stay at the White House and to speak to Congress. Buck thinks about how much he hates the president and is not impressed by the offer to Nicolae. Nicolae fakes humility by thanking him and telling him that he is not worthy. The call ends and Nicolae ends the interview before it begins by telling Buck that he is in trouble. He says he wants to help Buck as he tells him what has happened in the last few chapters since Alan died. Buck is stunned that he knows this, though it seems obvious since it has been reported in the news. Nicolae seems to be able to read Buck's mind by answering the questions that Buck is thinking of, yet hasn't spoken yet. Buck trusts Nicolae because of the hearsay of others. Nicolae offers to make all of Buck's problems go away. Buck counters by saying he is a reporter and that he cannot be bought or sold. Said by no reporter ever. If Buck were a real reporter, this should seem suspicious to him, but instead he fawns over Nicolae like a lost puppy. Nicolae tells a brief story about his past that makes little sense but is not surprising because the authors do not know how to write. He talks about how he went to school and became rich, then lost his money when for an unknown reason he took out a huge loan with Jonathan S. Nicolae was forced to default and made to enter a partnership with Jonathan after he pulled some strings to prevent Nicolae from paying him back. Nicolae reveals that he is going to be elected as the new leader of the United Nations and he will use his influence to help Buck. He was able to use the money from Jonathan S. to buy the old leader so he could take his place. Scene changes to Rayford as he has trouble sleeping. After pushing them out of his thoughts, he now can't stop thinking about his wife and son. He thinks about his sins, and though he knows he's forgiven, just like Bruce knew he was forgiven before he was left behind, he starts praying, and as he prays he wails Chloe's name because he's so upset that she won't convert. Chloe converting is all he cares about because he needs to make himself feel like he has the real answer to a question no one has asked. He doesn't really love her, but the narcissist in him needs self-validation. Chloe hears him and enters his room to find out what was wrong. She thought he might be having a nightmare. They hug and she ignores a remark he makes to her. This ends chapter 16. See you next time for chapter 17 of Left Behind.